A picturesque lake in the beautiful Finnish countryside becomes the site of gruesome homicides as four teenagers find their summer getaway turned into hell. Join us today as we unpack the grisly case of the Lake Bodom murders.
Hey guys, welcome back. Hope you enjoyed last week's episode. This week's episode is going to be done by Akmal and take it away.
Alright, so I really like this case because there are so many
So
characters
many.
in this. There's so many characters in this case. Just
Ooh.
absolute like archetypes in this case. And like the suspects are so interesting in and of themselves. So let's get into it. On the morning of June 5th, 1960, a group of boys were bird watching in the picturesque Finnish countryside near Lake Bodom when they spotted a suspicious looking blond man emerging out from the bush near the Hasbergten Peninsula at the southern end of the lake. He had apparently been walking away from a collapsed tent set up near the lake. The boys thought nothing of it at the time and continued walking. Later that fateful morning, while on a routine jog, Risto Shiran discovered dead bodies at the campsite and promptly alerted the police. The scene was horrifying and gruesome. There were four bodies in the campsite, three inside the tent and one on top of it, each exhibiting various degrees of blunt force trauma and stab wounds. The tent had slashes indicating that it was cut open from the outside, and there was blood splatter all over the site. To the police's surprise, one of the victims was still alive. 18-year-old Nils Gustafsson was rushed to the hospital, his skull being severely fractured due to the damage caused by what is suspected to be a heavy blunt weapon. The other bodies were identified as 15-year-old Mila Irmeli Björklund and Anya Tuulikki Maki, and 18-year-old Seppo Antero Bosman. Anya, Nils, and Seppo were found bludgeoned and stabbed inside the tent, suggesting that the killer had cut the string supporting the tent, trapping them and proceeding to attack them. Mila was discovered on top of the tent, severe injuries. Mila had been undressed from the waist down and her top was pulled up, exposing her bra. Mila had suffered significantly worse injuries than the others, with multiple stab wounds and some that might have been inflicted post-death. The killer had reportedly also stolen a number of the personal belongings of the group, including their wallets and IDs, and Nils' shoes. The shoes were later discovered about half a mile from the campsite, with bloodstains on them. The murder weapon was never found. 18-year-old Nils and Seppo had been best friends since childhood, having spent most of their school years together. Nils and his girlfriend Mila and Seppo, along with his girlfriend Anya, had planned a camping trip at the lake, and on June 4th, the group had arrived at Lake Bodom on Nils and Seppo's motorbikes. The girls had taken a swim in the lake while the boys set up the tent, using thin logs near the campsite to hold it up. The group then retired into the tent to sleep. It is believed the murders took place between 4 a.m. when the blond man had been seen walking away from the site at around 6 a.m. The police promptly began an investigation, gathering a search party of local volunteers to help look for clues. In hindsight, this turned out to be an awful decision, as the efforts of the search parties tarnished the crime scene and ruined evidence such as footprints. Many people were investigated by the police, including a bishop and a soldier whose parents had tipped the police off. One of the suspects was discovered to have a bloody knife in their possession, but tests concluded it did not match the blood types of any of the victims. An early suspect in the case was Karl Vladimir Gillstrom, known also by the nickname the Kiosk Man. a notoriously harsh man who ran a nearby kiosk and hated campers, even going as far as to throw rocks at passing children. He had a record for violent behavior and had even shot at a truck driver who was driving on the road located near Gilstrom's house. He infamously hid razors in the apples on his apple tree to deter children from taking apples from it. When a man informed Gilstrom of the killings the day the bodies were discovered, Gilstrom was described as unsurprised and expressionless. Many people in the community suspected Gilstrom of the killings, but his wife had provided the police with a substantial alibi confirming that Gilstrom had been asleep at home the day of the killings. Many years later, Gilstrom had confessed to a friend of the killings while drunk. His wife was diagnosed with breast cancer at the time, and while bedridden in the hospital, she confided to a friend and purportedly retracted her alibi for Gilstrom on that night, claiming she had been coerced by Gilstrom in fear for her safety and the safety of her children. But when police were informed and arrived to her to further question her, she denied it and stuck with the alibi. Gilstrom was never charged for the crimes and died in 1969 of drowning in Lake Bodom, suspected to have been a suicide. When initially brought to the hospital, after awakening from unconsciousness, Nils Gustafsson, only survivor of the murders, had suspected he had been in a motorcycle accident, as he hadn't remembered the events of that gruesome night. A few weeks after the attack, Nils had been recovering at the hospital. His fractures had partly healed and the swelling on his face due to the injuries had subsided. He was informed of what had happened and he was questioned by police but to no avail. His memories of the events that took place were foggy at best. He recalled the night before the killings. Him and Seppo had drinks while the girls were swimming. When the girls returned, they declined to have a drink. They then laid in the tent to sleep. Nils recalled waking up at 2 a.m. to Seppo rustling in his tent, searching for his fishing pole. Nils then decided to go for a swim and asked Seppo to join him. The girls were still asleep at that time. Nils dipped his toes in the water, but decided it was too cold and went back into his tent. Seppo stayed at the lake to continue fishing, but later by 3 a.m. he had returned to the tent as well. The girls had awoken when Nils left the tent, but they all went back to sleep together after Seppo returned to the tent. Nils' version of the events was corroborated by a diary entry made by Mila that morning. Nils claimed the only thing he remembered after returning from the lake and sleeping was waking up in the hospital. The police urged Nils to further remember, but he couldn't, so they decided to use more unconventional methods to retrieve his memory. A practicing doctor at the hospital was allowed to forensically hypnotize Nils and question him. Nils was asked about what had happened, and while under the hypnotic trance, he explained that they had been attacked in their tents by a man with dark clothes and red eyes. Nils further described the man as having thick lips and protruding cheekbones with a well-defined jaw. A composite sketch was drawn of the man and was released to the public. Many tips were given to the police, but one of them struck a strikingly eerie resemblance to the sketch. Hans Assmann was a German-born immigrant living in Finland, immigrating there after World War II. He had been an SS guard at Auschwitz and was alleged to be a spy for the KGB. Assmann had been driven to the hospital on June the 6th, only a day after the killings. He was unconscious, with red stains all over his clothing and hands and dirt stuck in his fingernails. Hospital staff examined him and soon realized he had been faking his unconsciousness. After being confronted on the matter, he showed little remorse and seemed amused by his prank. He had been admitted to the hospital for the day before being discharged. While there, a woman approached Hans and they chatted for a whilst amongst each other. She did not seem to be his wife, and their tone was secret. Hospital staff were convinced that Hans was the culprit when the sketch was released. They pleaded to the police to investigate his red-stained clothing, but they were reluctant to do so. Hans had provided a solid alibi to the police, stating he had been at his girlfriend's house that night along with her sister and her husband. When initially reporting on the crime, the newspaper described the man the boys who had been birdwatching had seen as having long, slick-back blonde hair. Curiously, Assmann sported a similar hairstyle, but had gotten his hair trimmed following the news articles. With little evidence to implicate Assmann, he was dropped as a possible suspect. A funeral had been held for the three victims, and a large crowd had gathered to mourn the victims. A chilling photograph taken from the funeral showed many mourners looking down with remorse on their face. But one man stood out from the crowd. He faced forward with his eyes bulged, staring attentively to his side. He had the characteristic protruding cheekbones and strong jaw described in the composite sketch. Many believed this man to be Hans Assmann. Like the lake, by the winter of 1960, the case had gone cold. With most suspects being ruled out and the lack of the murder weapon, the case could not be decisively solved. By the 1980s, DNA testing had become widespread to be used to solve crimes. Finland at the time had only one forensic lab, so the bandwidth for solving old, unsolved cases was low. In 2004, the county launched a new investigation into the case, with the intent of using DNA evidence from the crime scene. Nils' shoe, which had been found by investigators bloodied half a mile from the crime scene, was tested, and blood from the three victims was found. But curiously, Nils Gustafsson's blood was missing. This led investigators to speculate that he might have been the killer all along, being the only one alive. Nils was arrested and tried for the deaths of Anya, Seppo, and Mila. The prosecutors alleged that Nils had been drunk the night before the attacks and that he had brought a condom, which he intended to use with Milo. After she refused his advances, he became enraged and attacked the group with the murder weapon. Prosecutors point out the fact that Mila had severely worse injuries than the rest of the group as evidence of Nils' guilt. Nils then staged this scene and stowed away their belongings to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. He then injured himself to a lesser extent to make his story believable and laid next to his friends, awaiting the police. After news began to circulate of Nils' arrest, a woman in her 60s named Tarja explained to reporters that she had witnessed Nils murder his friends but was sworn to secrecy by her friends. Although damning, many parts of her story were contradictory to the events that had occurred. When pressed further about the identity of the friend she made the vow to, Tarja could not remember, and one friend she could remember was already deceased. She couldn't remember basic features about the victims or Nils, and got many facts about the case blatantly wrong. She explained that there was tension between Nils and the rest of the group that night. This was not corroborated by Mila's diary and was denied by Nils himself. The defense argued that Nils was innocent, citing Mila's diary and lack of a motive. Furthermore, blood splatter on the tent suggested that the group had been attacked whilst in the tent, rather than the crime scene being staged. They also argued that Nils' injuries, while not life-threatening, were not minor either. He had suffered severe brain damage and struggled to maintain his balance. The trial ultimately concluded that Nils was not guilty of the murders. Gillström remained a favorite suspect for armchair detectives, as although he didn't match the composite sketch, his habit of collapsing the tent on those inside eerily mimicked the way the campers had been murdered. Hans Assmann was another favorite suspect, as he matched the composite sketch, and it was believed that the police had been investigating him due to his involvement with the KGB, leading to national security issues. In 1997, a bedridden Assmann allowed a one-time interview to a Finnish reporter. When asked plainly if he had committed the murders, he answered, "I won't go into details," and this was seen as an admission of guilt. Assmann's alibi had been corroborated by all three of the people he had been with that night. It was also confirmed that Assmann had been painting on a construction site on the 5th and 6th of June. While on the site, a friend had offered him wine, which caused him to have severe stomach pain. He called his wife, who had found him unconscious, and phoned an ambulance. The red stains on his clothing wasn't blood, but merely paint. Assmann died in 1998.
Wow. Okay.
Mm,
It's quite a lot to process, but.
Big case, eh?
Who do you personally think had like the biggest motive?
Dude, let me tell you this
Like
Hans
killing.
Assmann guy. The second I heard his
Mhm.
name and who he was, and the second I looked at the composite sketch, the one they made, compared to his
Yeah.
actual face, I was so convinced that it's him. I mean, he's the archetype evil German guy. Like, he was SS officer in Auschwitz. I think I don't think I mentioned it in the case, but somewhere he bragged about killing people while he was in the SS. And he comes here, he's alleged to be a KGB spy. He basically admits it at the end. And just the composite sketch is so it's so demonic. And then when you look at the composite sketch compared to his actual face, like the protruding cheekbones and the strong jaw and the thick lips, like it's him. I'm so convinced it's him. Like he fits everything. But then Gilstrom kind of has the ammo, and he kind of is like the village tyrant sort of guy. Like, it's possible that it was him. I don't think Nils would have done it. I don't see him as that type of person.
And he was the only one that survived, right?
He's the only one that survived. That is kind of damning, but then again, like he struggled to maintain his own balance for a few days. Like there's a limit to how much you can hurt yourself, and I think the injuries he had were much further than that limit. So I don't think it was him. That's why I really like this case, because there are just so many characters in the case, and it's very compelling. Each of them has like a very good case for being the person who perpetrated the crime. Who do you think did it?
I don't know. I can't really place it, but like, kind of want to go with I want to go with. Oh, sorry, not the second. The first one. Waldemar.
Vladimir Gilstrom.
Yeah.
Okay, wait. Do me a solid. Search up Hans Assmann. It's spelled A-S-S, Assmann. Hans, Hansassasman. Search that up.
Okay. Ugh. Ah.
Yeah.
It's a very ugly picture. Dude looks creepy as fuck.
Compare the composite sketch to his actual face.
No, the eyes. Holy shit.
Tell me that's not him.
What made them not go with him? Like,
apparently he was part of the KGB. Like he was basically a Soviet spy, and they didn't want to apprehend him because of national security risks or whatever. So that was basically that was why they were being a bunch of bitches.
So I mean, imagine if it was him, and they just let a killer get away. But then he's already dead, so.
Just one thing with Hans Assmann is I don't see a motive.
Does this guy have like psychotic issues? Because I don't know. It just looks like he
does. It's like he came into the hospital pretending to be unconscious. But I mean, like, here's the thing. He was, I don't know, confirmed, but allegedly he was a KGB spy, right? Why would you put so much heat on yourself by committing such a high-profile murder? Because you see, like, this happened back in like 1960, and it is still like the worst possible homicide that has occurred in Finland up till today. Like nothing has matched it. So even if you were a KGB spy, why would you put that much heat on yourself by doing something like this?
Or maybe there was something bigger at play.
Maybe the kids saw something they weren't supposed to, and that's why he ended them.
But he let one get away, so I don't think.
Maybe that was like just his fault, not purposely letting them get away.
I mean, he did check himself in the same day Niels was brought into the hospital, right?
I was thinking the same thing. But it was a different hospital though.
Oh. Oh, then it wouldn't make sense. Because I mean, then Niels could have made an identification. Was he unconscious when they brought him in? Niels?
Yeah, he was. For a couple of weeks, actually. He was in a coma.
Oh.
And he woke up thinking he was in a motorcycle accident. I don't think you can fake that. I don't think you can fake being in a coma for that long and then wake up thinking you've been in a motorcycle accident. That Tarja woman is so weird. Like all of a sudden she just comes out like, oh, I made this vow, but I'm denouncing the vow now. I have to say I saw him murder his friend. But then who were the friends you made the vow to? Oh, I don't remember. It's strange, man, I swear. That's such an oddball, honestly.
Hmm.
This case actually gave me nightmares.
His face is going to give me nightmares, not the case, but his face.
Yeah, his face.
Ugh.
I'm not even kidding, I saw his face in my nightmare. I had a nightmare the other day, like day before yesterday, and I literally saw Hans Assmann's face. If you're listening to this, do not, and if you don't want nightmares, do not search up Hans Assmann. Just don't.
Yeah, I
Save
can't
yourself the
believe you
trouble.
just made me.
I had to, though, for the sake of the case.
No,
Yeah.
no, you could have just you could have avoided the whole thing and just tell me he looked exactly like that, and I would just take it because I didn't want to look at the picture.
I did, but then I know if you saw the photo, you would be like, no, it is him. It is him. So to make my case stronger, I asked you to search him.
Imagine if it was a colored picture. If it was a colored picture, I feel like it would have been less scary. But no, it's
Yeah, I
black
don't
and
know.
white.
I don't know why the black and white aesthetic is just so creepy.
It is.
But then, like if you take a black and white photo and then you put color on it, like all the colors look super exaggerated. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because like the coloring they do, it just exaggerates all the colors. So it turns like a really scary image into something that's actually kind of mild or comedically bad. It loses its scariness. It's a beautiful spot they were killed in also.
Really?
Yeah, Lake Bodom in Finland. Beautiful lake. Very infamous now, but yeah.
It's definitely not on my list of places I'd like to visit. So, I mean, imagine people just visiting famous places and like there could have been serial killers that no one ever knew about, and they'd have bodies buried there.
Hmm.
I don't know. I
I
always
think there's
think
a
about it.
place. I think in London and Rome as well. There are like these
Oh.
taverns, underground taverns, which are just like littered with bodies.
Whoa.
Not bodies, like skeletons, like hundreds and hundreds of skeletons.
I hope you guys enjoyed this very bizarre case that I'm forever going to be haunted by now because of his stupid face. And stay tuned for next week's episode. It's going to be epic. Bye.